in a land where weakness meant death and strength was the only law. There existed a people unlike any other. From the moment they were born, they were tested, judged, not by who they could become, but by whether they deserved to live at all. They were not raised with comfort. They were not taught fear. They were shaped into something else. Warriors forged through pain, discipline carved into their very being. They did not fight for glory. They did not fight for fame. They fought because it was all they knew. On history before us, we uncover the stories buried beneath time. Before we step into their world, make sure to subscribe. This is the story of the Spartans, the warriors who never backed down. The land was unforgiving, not vast, not rich, not welcoming, just stone, mountains, and silence. In the southern reaches of ancient Greece, far from the glittering cities and thriving trade routes, there stood a place where survival was never guaranteed, a place where life did not begin with comfort, but with judgment. This was Sparta, a city that did not grow powerful through wealth, or culture, or art, but through something far more ruthless: control. From the moment a child was born, their fate was not their own. They were not welcomed into the world with celebration, but with inspection. Newborns were carried before the elders, examined, evaluated. If the child was strong, they were allowed to live. If not, they were left behind. Because in Sparta, weakness was not tolerated. It was erased. The young boy who would one day become a warrior did not remember this moment. No one ever did. But it shaped everything that followed. His childhood did not belong to him. At the age of 7, he was taken. Not by force, but by tradition. The agoge had begun. There were no families here, no comfort, no softness, only training. The boys were grouped together, stripped of individuality, and reshaped into something uniform. They were given little food, just enough to survive, never enough to feel satisfied. Hunger was part of the lesson. They were encouraged to steal, not as an act of rebellion, but as a test of skill. If they succeeded, they ate. If they were caught, they were punished. Not for stealing, but for failing. Pain was constant. Cold was constant. Discomfort was constant, because the body had to learn, to endure. They walked barefoot, even in winter. They slept on reeds they gathered themselves. Their clothing was minimal, their shelter basic, because comfort created weakness. And weakness had no place in Sparta. But the training was not just physical, it was mental. They were taught to speak little, but think clearly, to obey without hesitation, to move as one, not as individuals. Because in battle, there was no room for hesitation. Years passed. The boy became stronger, faster, harder, but something else changed too. He began to feel less. Not because he had no emotions, but because he had learned to control them. Fear, anger, pain, they were no longer reactions. They were tools. At the age of 12, the training intensified. The boys were left with even less. Less food, less clothing, less rest. Because now it was about survival, not just endurance. They were sent into the wild, alone, with nothing, to hunt, to hide, to survive. This was not a test. This was reality. Some returned, others did not. But those who came back were different. They no longer questioned. They no longer doubted. They understood. Sparta did not create warriors. It revealed them. As the boy grew older, his body bore the marks of his training. Scars from punishment, cuts from practice, bruises that never fully healed. But none of it mattered, because pain was no longer something to fear. It was something to ignore. At the age of 18, he stood among others like him. No longer boys, not yet men, but something in between, something shaped and tested and hardened beyond recognition. They trained together now, as units, not individuals, because in Sparta, the army was everything. They learned to fight in formation, shield beside shield, step by step, movement synchronized, because a Spartan warrior was never alone. He was part of something greater, something unbreakable. The phalanx, a wall of shields, a line of spears, a force that moved as one. It was not chaos, it was precision. Each man trusted the one beside him, because if one fell, the entire line could break. And if the line broke, everything was lost. So they held. No matter what, they held. At the age of 20, the boy became a soldier, not through ceremony, not through recognition, but through acceptance. He was now part of Sparta, fully, completely. His life no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the state. He would eat with his fellow soldiers, train with them, fight with them, and if necessary, die with them. Marriage was allowed. But family was distant, because loyalty belonged elsewhere, to Sparta, to the brotherhood, to the line. The young Spartan stood now on the edge of something he had been prepared for his entire life. War, not a distant idea, not a possibility, but an inevitability. The air was different before battle. He could feel it, not fear, not exactly, something deeper, something quieter. The ground beneath his feet felt steady, familiar, because this was where everything led. All the training, all the pain, all the years, they had brought him here, to this moment, across the field. Another army waited, different, larger, less controlled, but still dangerous, because numbers could overwhelm. The Spartan adjusted his grip on the shield, heavy, solid, reliable. His spear rested in his hand, balanced, sharp, ready. He looked to his left. Another Spartan. Same stance, same focus, same silence. To his right, the same. No words were needed, because everything had already been said through years of training. The command came, short, clear. They moved, together. The first step, always the hardest, because it was the moment where thought ended and action began. The distance closed, slowly at first, then faster. The sound of movement grew, the ground trembled, the moment approached, and then, impact. Shields collided, spears struck. The sound echoed across the field, but there was no chaos, not here, not for them. The line held. It always did, because this was what they were made for. Not individuals, not heroes, but a force, a system, a wall that did not break. The young Spartan pushed forward, step by step, shield locked, spear thrust. No hesitation, no doubt. Because in Sparta, there was no other way. You did not retreat. You did not surrender. You did not break. You held the line, or you died trying. The line did not move forward all at once. It pressed, slowly, relentlessly. Each step was not taken by a man, but by the formation itself. Shields locked together, edges overlapping, creating a wall that was more than wood and bronze. It was discipline. It was trust. It was Sparta. The young Spartan felt the weight of the shield against his arm, the pressure from the man beside him, the force of the enemy pushing back. It was not a fight of speed. It was a fight of endurance. The first clash had already passed. Now came the struggle, the grinding, the pushing, the moment where strength alone was not enough. Across the line, the enemy tried to break them. Shouts rose, weapons struck wildly. Men surged forward with desperation. But the Spartans did not respond in the same way. They did not shout. They did not rush. They held. The young Spartan drove his shoulder forward, pressing into the shield, feeling the resistance in front of him. His spear moved in short, controlled thrusts, not wide swings. There was no room for wasted motion here. Every movement had a purpose. Every action had been practiced. Again, and again, and again. To his left, a Spartan shifted slightly, adjusting his position, compensating for pressure from the enemy. The young man followed without thinking, maintaining the line, keeping the formation intact, because one break, one gap, could mean everything. A shout came from somewhere along the line, not panic, a signal. The formation adjusted. A subtle shift, barely visible to an untrained eye. But enough. The pressure changed. The enemy lost balance for a fraction of a moment, and the Spartans moved, together, forward. The young Spartan felt it, the shift in momentum, the change in control. The line was advancing now, not fast, never fast, but steady, unstoppable. The enemy began to fall back, not in order, not in formation, but in pieces. And that was where the Spartans were strongest. Because they did not chase chaos, they imposed order. The young Spartan stepped forward again, his spear finding its mark, his shield absorbing impact, his body moving without hesitation. This was no longer about fear. It was about function. He was no longer reacting. He was executing. Time blurred. The sounds merged. Metal striking metal. Feet grinding against dirt. A breath, heavy, controlled, endless. The line pushed further. The enemy weakened. The formation held. And slowly, the outcome became inevitable. But battle was never clean, never simple. To the right, a break. Small, but real. A Spartan stumbled, not fallen, but enough. The pressure shifted instantly. The enemy saw it, moved toward it, because weakness, no matter how small, drew attention. The young Spartan turned his head just enough to see it, and without thinking, he moved, not out of position, but into it. His shield pressed outward, closing the gap, reinforcing the line. The man beside him recovered, stepping back into place. The formation held, again, because that was the difference. Not strength, not numbers, but unity. Each man was responsible for the other. Each man carried more than himself. The young Spartan felt the impact of another strike against his shield, harder this time, more desperate. The enemy was losing control, and losing control meant losing the fight. Another signal. The line shifted again. Spears moved in unison, forward, back, forward. A rhythm, a pattern, impossible to break once it was established. The enemy faltered, then broke. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. The line advanced, the pressure increased, and suddenly, the battle changed, because now, it was no longer a fight, it was a collapse. The enemy retreated, faster, disorganized. Some dropped their weapons. Others tried to regroup, but it was too late. The Spartans did not chase wildly. They advanced carefully, controlled, because even in victory, discipline remained. The young Spartan slowed his movement, his breathing heavy now. his body beginning to feel the strain. The fight had not been quick, it had not been easy, but it had been inevitable. The field fell quiet, slowly, gradually. The sounds faded, the tension lifted, but the weight remained, because even in victory, there was no celebration, only silence. The Spartans stood where they were, in formation, waiting, because the battle was not over until it was confirmed. The command came, short, clear. The line broke, not in disorder, but with purpose. Each man stepping back, lowering his shield, his spear resting at his side. The young Spartan looked around. The field was different now, changed. The ground marked, the air heavier, the enemy gone, or no longer a threat. But his focus did not linger there, because in Sparta, the battle was never the end. It was part of something larger, a cycle. Training, fighting, enduring, returning, preparing again. The young Spartan walked with the others. No words, no celebration. Because there was nothing to celebrate. They had done what they were meant to do. Nothing more, nothing less. As they moved away from the field, the weight of the shield remained on his arm. The imprint of the strap still pressed into his skin. His body ached, his muscles heavy, his breath still uneven. But his mind was clear, because now he understood. Sparta did not win battles through strength alone. It won through control, through discipline, through the absence of doubt. And in that absence, there was only one outcome. You held the line, or you became part of what broke against it. The return from battle was quieter than the march toward it. No chants, no celebration. Only the steady rhythm of footsteps, shields resting against tired arms, spears carried without tension. The Spartans moved as they always had, together, controlled, unchanged on the surface. But something always shifted after a battle, not visible, not spoken, felt. The young Spartan walked among them, his body heavier now, not from defeat, but from understanding. The weight of what had happened settled slowly, pressing deeper with each step, because the field behind them was no longer just ground, it was memory. As they approached the city, the landscape changed. The harsh terrain remained, but there was structure now, order, stone walls, narrow paths, a place that looked simple, yet carried something far more rigid beneath it. Sparta did not welcome them back with noise. It did not need to, because in this place, duty was expected, not praised. The gates opened. The formation did not break. They entered the city the same way they had left it, as one. Inside, life continued as if nothing had happened. Citizens moved through the streets. Conversations carried on. No one rushed toward them. No one stopped them. Because battle was not an event. It was routine. The young Spartan noticed it immediately. The absence of reaction, the lack of acknowledgement. At first, it felt strange. Then, it made sense. Because this was Sparta. And in Sparta, victory was not extraordinary. It was expected. They moved toward their quarters. The same place they had slept before. The same place they would sleep again. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. The young Spartan set his shield down slowly. The weight left his arm, but the imprint remained, a mark that would fade with time, but never fully disappear. He sat. For the first time since the battle, he stopped moving. Across from him, others did the same. Some removed their armor. Others cleaned their weapons. A few simply stared ahead, lost in thought. No one spoke. because words were not needed. They all understood. The training had prepared them for this. But preparation was not the same as experience, and now they had experienced it. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. Time continued, as it always did. The young Spartan stood again, his body resisting slightly, the fatigue settling deeper now that movement had stopped. He walked toward the training grounds, not because he was ordered to, but because it was expected, because rest was not part of the system. The training field was already active. Others were there, practicing, repeating movements, correcting mistakes, because the battle had not ended anything. It had revealed things, weaknesses, gaps, moments of hesitation, and those moments had to be removed. The instructor stood in the center, watching, silent, observing, as always. The young Spartan picked up a wooden weapon, lighter than the real one, but still familiar. He moved into position and began again. Strike, step, block, turn. The same movements, the same patterns. But now they felt different, more real, more precise. Because now he understood why they existed. The instructor approached. "You shifted too early." The young Spartan paused, looked at him. The gap closed. The instructor nodded slightly, but it almost opened. A small difference, but important. Because in battle, small differences mattered. They continued. The training did not slow. It did not ease, because the next battle would come. And when it did, there would be no time to think, only to act. As the day moved on, the city remained unchanged. The same rhythm, the same silence, the same control. But beneath it, there was always movement, always preparation, always readiness, because Sparta did not wait for war. It lived within it. Later, as the light began to fade, the young Spartan found himself walking alone. Not far, just enough to create space. He moved along the edge of the city, where the stone met the open land. The same land he had marched across. The same land where the battle had taken place. He stopped, looked out. The distance stretched before him, quiet, still, almost peaceful. But he knew better, because he had seen what lay beneath that stillness. The sudden shift, the moment when everything changed. The point where control was tested, and sometimes lost. A presence approached. He did not turn. He recognized the steps. The veteran, older, more experienced, someone who had stood in more battles than most. "You held the line." The words came calmly, not as praise, but as acknowledgement. The young Spartan nodded slightly. "We all did." A pause. The veteran looked out across the same land. "For now." The young Spartan frowned slightly. "For now?" The veteran did not look at him. "The line doesn't break when it's strong." Another pause. "It breaks when it thinks it can't." The meaning settled slowly, because strength was not permanent. Control was not guaranteed. Everything could shift at any moment. The young Spartan remained silent because he understood, at least, more than he had before. Night approached. The city grew quieter. The torches were lit. The shadows deepened. The day ended. But not the system, not the preparation, not the expectation. The young Spartan returned, back to the same place, the same routine, the same cycle, because there was no escape from it, no break, no pause, only continuation. As he lay down, the events of the day returned again, the battle, the movement, the impact. But this time, something else was there. Clarity. Because now, he knew what he was part of. Not just a city, not just an army, but a system built on something absolute. Discipline, control, endurance. And in that system, there was only one rule. You did not fight to win. You fought to hold the line until the moment came when the line could no longer be held. The days did not separate themselves from one another. They blended. Training, marching, silence, repetition. Everything moved in a cycle that never truly stopped. The young Spartan woke before the light, just as he had every day before, his body responding without hesitation, without resistance, because routine had replaced choice. The air was cold in the early hours, the ground hard beneath his feet as he stepped outside. Around him, others moved the same way. No wasted motion, no unnecessary sound. The city was already awake. It always was, because Sparta did not rest. It prepared. The training ground filled quickly. Lines formed without commands. Positions taken without instruction. Every man knew where to stand, where to move, what to do. Because everything had been taught and reinforced again and again. The instructor walked between them, his presence quiet but absolute. Again, the word was enough. The drills began. Shields raised, spears aligned, steps measured, forward, back, forward. The same movements repeated endlessly, not to learn them, but to remove the need to think about them, because thinking slowed reaction, and in battle, delay meant death. The young Spartan moved with them, his body following the rhythm, his mind no longer questioning it. The shield felt natural now, an extension of himself rather than something he carried. The spear moved without hesitation. Strike, return, guard. Everything flowed. But even in this control, there was tension. Because training was not about perfection. It was about removing weakness. The instructor stopped in front of him. Your stance. The young Spartan froze. Too narrow. He adjusted immediately. Again, the drill continued. The correction was small, but important, because in battle, small things decided everything. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. The heat increased, but the training did not slow. It never did, because the body had to learn to endure, no matter the condition. Sweat ran down his face, his grip tightening slightly as fatigue began to settle into his muscles. But he did not stop. No one did, because stopping was not an option. Eventually, the drills ended, not with a signal, not with relief, but with a shift. The instructor stepped back. Eat. The word carried no comfort, only instruction. They moved together. Food was simple, minimal, just enough, because hunger was still part of the system. The young Spartan ate without speaking, his body absorbing what little energy it was given. Around him, the others did the same. No conversation, no distraction, only function. Afterward, there was no rest, only movement. They gathered again, this time for something different. The older Spartans stood at the center. Not instructors, not commanders, examples. Men who had survived longer, fought more, endured beyond expectation. One of them stepped forward. He carried no weapon, only presence. You think training prepares you? He looked at them. It doesn't. Silence followed, because no one questioned. Training shows you what to do. A pause. Battle shows you what you are. The young Spartan felt the words settle, because he had already begun to understand. But there is something else. The older man walked slowly, his gaze moving across them. Something you haven't faced yet. He stopped. Doubt. The word hung in the air. You don't feel it now, he continued, because you trust the system. Another pause. But one day, something will break that trust. No movement, no reaction, only listening. And when it does, he looked directly at them. You either hold the line, a longer pause, or you become the reason it breaks. The meaning was clear. The young Spartan lowered his gaze slightly, because he understood, not fully, but enough. The training resumed, but something had changed, not in movement, not in structure, in awareness, because now the idea of failure was not abstract, it was real. Later, as the day moved on, they were sent beyond the city, into the land, not for battle, not for confrontation, but for something else, endurance. The ground was uneven, rough, unforgiving. They moved in formation at first, then spread out slightly as the terrain demanded adjustment. The young Spartan stepped carefully, his body adapting, maintaining balance, conserving energy, because even movement had to be controlled. The distance grew, the sun lowered, fatigue increased, but the pace remained, because slowing down was not part of the system. Eventually, they reached a stopping point. No structure, no shelter, only land. Stay. The command was given. Simple, direct. The young Spartan understood immediately. Another test, not of strength, but of survival. The group spread out, each man finding his place, gathering what he could, preparing for the night. There would be no comfort, no fire, no protection, only endurance. The light faded. The temperature dropped. The sounds of the land shifted. The young Spartan remained still, conserving energy, controlling his breath, listening, because awareness was survival. Hours passed, slowly. The cold deepened, but he did not move unnecessarily, because movement wasted energy, and energy was limited. At some point, the line between training and reality disappeared. This was no longer practice. This was existence, and existence demanded control. When morning came, it did not feel like relief, only continuation. They returned, the same way they had left, without words, without change. But the young Spartan knew something now, something that could not be taught, something that could only be experienced. Sparta was not building warriors for battle. It was building men who could endure anything. Hunger, cold, pain, fear, doubt, everything. Because in the end, the greatest enemy was not the one in front of you. It was the moment when you questioned yourself. And in Sparta, there was no room for that. Only one truth remained. You held the line, or you became what broke it. The summons did not come with urgency. It never did. A single word, passed quietly from one Spartan to another, carried more weight than any shouted command. The young Spartan heard it and stood without hesitation, his body already moving before the thought had fully formed. They were assembling, not for training, not for routine, for something else. The air felt different. He stepped into formation with the others, the lines forming naturally, instinctively, as if they had always existed that way. No corrections, no adjustments, because this was what they had been shaped for. A messenger arrived, dust-covered, breathing heavy, but composed, always composed. He spoke only to the commanders, but the message did not need to be repeated. The shift in posture alone was enough. War, not distant, not potential, immediate. The young Spartan felt it settle inside him, not fear, not excitement, something deeper, a recognition, because this was the moment every part of his life had been leading toward. The march began without delay. There was no gathering of supplies, no hesitation, no preparation beyond what already existed. Everything they needed, they carried. Everything they were was already decided. They moved as one, leaving the city behind, the stone walls fading into the distance. The land opened before them once again, rough, uneven, familiar. The rhythm of their steps returned, steady, controlled, unbroken. Hours passed, then more. The sun rose higher, then began its slow descent again. Time mattered, but it did not control them, because their pace did not change. It did not need to. As they moved, the commanders spoke in low voices, passing information, adjusting direction. The young Spartan did not hear the details. He did not need to. His role was not to decide, it was to execute. And that clarity made everything simpler. They reached the edge of a narrow pass as the light began to fade. Stone walls rose on either side, high and close, forming a natural choke point. The ground narrowed, forcing any movement through it into a confined space. The young Spartan looked ahead, then to the sides, then back. Understanding formed quickly. This was not random. This was chosen. The formation stopped. Commands were given. Short, precise. The Spartans moved into position, forming their line across the narrow path. Shields raised, spears aligned. They would not advance here. They would hold. The young Spartan took his place, his shield locking into position with the man beside him. The line formed perfectly, each edge overlapping, each gap closed. The wall was complete. Night fell slowly. The torches were lit behind them, casting long shadows across the ground. The pass ahead remained dark, silent, but not empty. They could feel it. Movement in the distance, the presence of something approaching. The young Spartan tightened his grip slightly, not from fear, from readiness, because now everything became clear. They were outnumbered. It was obvious. It had been from the moment they arrived. But that did not matter. Numbers did not define the outcome here. Position did. Control did. Discipline did. The sound came first, faint, then growing. Footsteps. Many. The enemy was approaching. The young Spartan focused forward, his breath steady, his body still. Around him, the line did not move. Not a shift, not a sound. Because this moment required absolute control. The first figures appeared in the darkness, then more, then many more. The space beyond the pass filled with movement, with noise, with presence. The enemy was larger, louder, less controlled. But that was expected. They approached, closer, closer. The distance closed, and then impact. The first clash echoed through the pass, amplified by the stone walls, the sound sharper, heavier. The pressure came instantly, pushing against the shields, testing the line. The young Spartan held. The force traveled through his arm, into his shoulder, into his body, but he did not move. He could not, because behind him there was nothing, only the line. And if the line broke, everything ended. The enemy pushed harder, their numbers pressing forward, trying to force movement, to create space, to break the formation. But the Spartans did not respond with chaos. They responded with control. The line adjusted, minimally, just enough. Spears moved, forward, back, forward. The rhythm returned, even here, even now. The young Spartan struck, not wildly, not aggressively, but with precision. Each thrust controlled, each movement measured, because this was not a battle of speed, it was a battle of endurance. The enemy rotated. New men pushed forward, fresh, stronger, trying to break the line through sheer force. But the Spartans did not tire the same way, because they did not waste energy. They conserved it. They used it only when needed. The young Spartan felt the strain building in his arms, his legs, his core. But he did not react to it. He controlled it, because control was everything. Time passed, minutes, then more. The pressure did not stop. It did not slow. But the line held, always. A man to his left shifted slightly, not enough to break, but enough to notice. The young Spartan adjusted immediately, reinforcing the position, closing the space, maintaining the structure. Because now, there was no thought, only reaction, only execution. The enemy grew frustrated. The noise increased. The pushes became less controlled, more desperate, and desperation created openings. The Spartans used them, not all at once, not recklessly, but consistently. Every small mistake, every moment of imbalance, every hesitation, it was met with precision. The line advanced, just slightly, then held again. The cycle repeated. Pressure, control, adjustment, endurance. The young Spartan no longer felt the passage of time, only the moment, only the space in front of him, only the shield beside him, only the line, because everything else had disappeared. And in that disappearance, there was clarity. This was not about winning, not about defeating the enemy completely. It was about holding, for as long as necessary, for as long as possible, until the moment came when the enemy could no longer continue, or the line could no longer hold. And until that moment, there was only one truth. You did not move. You did not break. You held, no matter what came against you, no matter how long it lasted, because in Sparta, the line was everything, and everything depended on it. The pressure did not ease, it changed. At first, the enemy had rushed the pass with force, trying to overwhelm the line in a single surge. That had failed. Now, they adapted. The young Spartan felt it immediately. The rhythm shifted. The pushes became measured, the strikes more controlled, the noise less chaotic, more focused, because the enemy was learning, and a learning enemy was more dangerous. The line remained unbroken. But the fight was no longer simple. The young Spartan adjusted his stance slightly, widening his base, lowering his center, absorbing the force more efficiently. The shield pressed harder into his arm, the edge biting into the flesh beneath the strap. He ignored it, because pain was expected. To his right, a veteran moved just a fraction forward, drawing attention, forcing the enemy to commit their weight in that direction. Instantly, the Spartans around him adjusted, shifting pressure, redirecting force. It was subtle, but powerful. Because control was never obvious, it was precise. The young Spartan thrust his spear again, not aiming for speed, but for timing. The point met resistance, then gave way just enough before he pulled it back, resetting his position again. No wasted movement, no unnecessary effort, because energy was limited, and this battle was not ending quickly. The enemy rotated their front line, Fresh men stepped forward, stronger, rested, determined. The pressure increased again. The shields collided with more force now, the impact echoing through the pass, amplified by stone and confined space. The young Spartan felt it travel through him, shaking his stance for a brief moment, but the line held, always. Behind them, the commanders moved quietly, observing, adjusting, maintaining order. Their voices were low, their instructions minimal, because too many words created confusion, and confusion created weakness. The sun rose higher, then began to fall. Time passed, but the line did not move. The young Spartan's arms began to burn, his legs heavy, his breath deeper now, more controlled. Every part of his body felt the strain, but none of it mattered, because stopping was not an option. To his left, a man faltered. Not a fall, not yet, but enough. The shield dipped, just slightly. The young Spartan reacted instantly, pressing his own shield outward, reinforcing the space, preventing the gap from forming. The man recovered, stepped back into position. The line held, again, because that was the difference. Not strength, not skill, but awareness. Each man watching not just the enemy, but each other. The enemy pushed harder, frustration building, because nothing they did broke the formation. They tried speed, they tried force, they tried numbers, but the result remained the same: resistance, unyielding, constant. The young Spartan no longer thought about the outcome. He did not think about survival. He did not think about victory. He thought only about the next movement, the next breath, the next step, because that was enough, because that was all that existed. The moment and the line. As the light began to fade again, the temperature dropped slightly, the air cooling, the shadows returning. But the battle did not stop. It slowed, but it did not end. The enemy withdrew slightly, not retreat, adjustment. They regrouped beyond the immediate pressure of the mace, pulling back just enough to break the constant contact. The young Spartan remained still, shield raised, spear ready. Because this pause was not safety, it was preparation. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, uncertain, because movement could return at any moment. A voice came from behind. Hold. Simple. Clear. The command did not change anything. It reinforced it. The young Spartan maintained his position, his eyes fixed forward, his body still, his breathing controlled. Minutes passed, then more. The enemy did not rush back immediately. Instead, something else happened. They began to move differently. The young Spartan noticed it, not directly in front of him, to the sides, movement along the edges of the pass, searching, testing, looking for another way, because direct force had failed. Now, they looked for weakness. The realization settled quickly. The pass could not be broken from the front, so it would be tested from elsewhere. The commanders saw it too. Instructions passed down the line. Small adjustments. Reinforcements shifted slightly. Positions tightened. Because now, the battle was changing again. The young Spartan felt the tension return. Different, more dangerous. Because this was no longer about endurance alone. It was about awareness. The enemy attacked again, but not the same way. Smaller groups, faster movements, trying to create confusion, trying to disrupt the rhythm. The line responded, not with speed, but with control. Each movement absorbed, each attempt contained. Because the formation was not rigid, it was adaptive, flexible within structure. The young Spartan moved with it, without thought, without hesitation, because now he was not learning, he was part of it. The attacks continued, short, sharp, relentless, but ineffective, because every attempt met the same response: stability. The enemy began to tire again, their movements slower, their strikes less precise, because effort without result drained more than failure. The young Spartan felt the shift, the moment when pressure began to weaken, the moment when control began to return fully. The line advanced, slightly, then held. Again, the pattern repeated, until the enemy finally broke. Not in panic, not completely, but enough to create space, enough to reduce pressure, enough to change the battle. The young Spartan lowered his spear slightly, not fully, never fully, because the fight was not over, but something had changed. Something had been proven. The line could hold against numbers, against pressure, against time. And in that proof, there was certainty, because Sparta did not rely on hope. It relied on what had already been tested, and what had been tested had held. The young Spartan remained in position, still, focused, aware, because he understood now. This was not just a battle, it was a demonstration of what happened when discipline replaced fear, when control replaced chaos, when the line did not break, no matter what stood against it. And as long as that remained true, the outcome was already decided. The break in pressure did not bring relief. It brought uncertainty. For a brief moment, the pass grew quiet again, not silent, never silent, but quieter than before. The clash of shields faded, replaced by distant movement, shifting formations. Voices carried through the narrow space ahead. The enemy had pulled back, not in defeat, not completely, but enough to change the rhythm. The young Spartan did not lower his guard. None of them did, because a pause in battle was never safety. It was preparation. The line remained intact, shields still raised, spears still angled forward, every man holding position as if the next impact could come at any second. And it could. Minutes passed, then more. The sun moved slowly across the sky, casting longer shadows into the pass. The air cooled slightly, but the tension remained. The young Spartan listened, not just with his ears, but with everything. The subtle shifts, the distant movement, the way the sound echoed differently now, because something had changed, and he needed to understand what. Behind him, a commander stepped forward, quiet, controlled. He spoke just loud enough for the line to hear. They are moving. No panic, no urgency, just information. The young Spartan focused forward, his eyes narrowing slightly as he scanned the edges of the pass. The enemy was no longer gathering directly in front of them. They were spreading, testing, looking for space, looking for a way around. The realization settled quickly. This position was strong, but not absolute. The enemy did not need to break the line here. They only needed to avoid it. The young Spartan felt the weight of that understanding, because it changed everything. Holding the line was no longer enough. Now, the line had to hold long enough. The command came again. Adjust. The formation shifted, not breaking, not weakening, but tightening. Some Spartans moved slightly back, others forward, reinforcing positions, preparing for pressure from different directions. Because now, the threat was no longer just ahead. The young Spartan felt it in his stance, in his balance, in the way his body prepared for movement. This was different, more complex, more dangerous. The enemy attacked again, but not as before. Small groups rushed forward, striking quickly, then pulling back, trying to draw movement, trying to force reaction. The young Spartan did not chase. He did not step forward beyond the line, because leaving the line was the first mistake. The formation held, each attack absorbed, each attempt contained, but the pattern continued, again and again, testing, probing, looking for weakness. The young Spartan understood. This was not about breaking them immediately. It was about wearing them down. Time passed. The attacks did not stop. They changed. They adapted. They returned from different angles, faster, sharper. The young Spartan's body responded, adjusting without thought, his shield moving, his spear striking, his stance shifting just enough to maintain balance. But fatigue was building, not just in him, in all of them. The line still held, but the strain was real now, visible, subtle, but present. To his right, a Spartan's breathing grew heavier. To his left, another adjusted his stance more often than before. Small signs, but important, because the enemy would see them too. The young Spartan tightened his focus. He could not control the entire line, but he could control himself, his position, his movement, his response, because that was enough. That was all that was required. The attacks intensified again. The enemy pushed harder, sensing the change, sensing the fatigue, trying to exploit it before it became control again. The young Spartan felt the impact of a stronger strike, his shield jolting slightly, his arm absorbing the force. His stance held, but barely. He adjusted immediately, reset, controlled, because hesitation was not allowed. The line bent, just slightly, but did not break. The command came again. Hold. It was always the same, because it never changed. The young Spartan pressed forward, just enough to regain space, just enough to re-establish control. The man beside him did the same, then the next, then the next. The line straightened again. Stability returned, for a moment. Then the attacks resumed. The cycle continued. Pressure, adjustment, endurance. The young Spartan no longer measured time. He no longer counted moments. He existed within the line. Nothing beyond it mattered, not the enemy, not the outcome, only the position, only the hold, only the control. As the light began to fade once more, the battlefield shifted again. The enemy withdrew further this time, pulling back beyond immediate reach, regrouping once more. But this time, something felt different. The young Spartan watched carefully. Because the pattern had changed. The attacks had stopped. Completely. The silence returned, but it was not the same as before. This silence was heavier. The commander moved forward again, his voice calm. They will not break the line. A pause. They will go around it. The young Spartan felt the words settle, because he already knew. They will try to take the path behind us. Another pause. We hold. The meaning was clear. They were not here to win, not in the traditional sense. They were here to delay, to control, to prevent movement for as long as possible, because somewhere else, something depended on this. The young Spartan adjusted his grip on the shield. The weight felt heavier now, but also more certain, because now he understood fully. This was not just a battle. It was a stand, a moment where everything was decided not by movement, but by resistance. The enemy would return, Not here, not directly, but somewhere. And when they did, the Spartans would still be here, holding, enduring, unmoving, because that was what they had been built for. Not to chase victory, not to seek glory, but to become something unbreakable, something that did not yield, something that remained, even when everything else moved around it. The young Spartan stood firm, his body tired, his arms heavy, his breath controlled, because none of that mattered. Only one thing did, the line. And as long as it remained, so would he. Night came down over the pass like a weight, not sudden, not violent, just heavy. The light faded slowly, the edges of the cliffs darkening first, then the path itself, until the world narrowed into shadows and shapes. The Spartans did not move. They remained where they had stood all day, because movement was not part of the plan. Torches were not lit along the front. Only faint fire behind the line, far enough to give minimal light, not enough to expose them fully. The young Spartan could barely see beyond the outline of the shields in front of him, the silhouettes of the men beside him. But he did not need to see clearly. He needed to feel the ground beneath his feet, the pressure in the air, the sound, always the sound, because in darkness, sound became everything. The enemy did not return immediately, but they did not leave either. That was clear. The faint noise carried through the pass, movement beyond sight, voices too distant to understand, metal shifting, boots pressing against stone. They were there, waiting, preparing. The young Spartan adjusted his stance slightly, shifting his weight without breaking formation. His muscles ached now, deeply, a constant tension that had settled into his body. But he controlled it, because control was all that remained. Behind him, a commander spoke quietly. They will come in the dark. No reaction, no surprise, because it was expected. The young Spartan focused forward, his breathing slow, his grip firm. The shield felt heavier now, not because it had changed, but because he had carried it longer than ever before. Time passed, measured only by breath, by tension, by the absence of action. And then it came. Not loud, not chaotic. At first, just a shift. A movement in the dark, then another, then many. The enemy advanced, not in a rush, not like before. Quiet, controlled, trying to move unseen. But the Spartans were ready. They did not wait for impact. They did not allow surprise. The command came, soft, forward. The line stepped. Together. Just one step, but enough. The enemy met them. Steel struck. The sound exploded through the pass, louder in the darkness, sharper, more sudden. The young Spartan felt the impact instantly. The force against his shield stronger than before, less predictable. Because the enemy was not pushing blindly now. They were targeting, striking where they believed the line was weakest. The young Spartan absorbed the hit, his body reacting, adjusting, maintaining position. His spear moved, striking forward into the unseen space, guided more by instinct than sight. The fight had changed. This was no longer about visibility. It was about reaction. The line held, but it was harder now. Because in darkness, control was tested differently. To his left, a Spartan shifted too far forward. The young Spartan reacted immediately, pressing his shield outward, pulling the formation back into alignment. The man corrected himself. The line stabilized, again, because even here, even now, the structure remained. The enemy pressed harder. their confidence growing in the dark, their movements faster, more aggressive. They believed the Spartans could not see, could not react. But they were wrong, because the Spartans did not rely on sight alone. They relied on each other, on position, on rhythm. The young Spartan felt the presence beside him more than he saw it. The movement of the shield, the timing of the step, the shift of weight. Everything connected, everything synchronized. The line moved as one. Even in darkness, the attacks continued, short, sharp, relentless, but contained, always contained. Time stretched. The young Spartan lost all sense of it. There was no day or night anymore. Only the fight, only the pressure, only the line. His arms burned, his legs strained, his breath deepened, but he did not slow. He could not, because slowing meant breaking, and breaking meant everything ending. A heavier impact came, stronger than before. His shield jolted back, his stance shifting, his foot sliding slightly against the ground. For a fraction of a second, he felt it, the possibility, the break. But it did not happen. He adjusted, immediately, reset, controlled. The line held, again, because that was the difference, not perfection, but recovery. The enemy faltered, not completely, but enough. Their attacks became less precise, their movements less controlled. The darkness that had given them advantage now worked against them, because they could not see the line, they could not find the gaps, because there were none. The Spartans advanced, just slightly, just enough to shift momentum. The enemy pulled back, then forward again, but weaker, less certain. The pattern repeated, until finally, the pressure eased, the attack slowed, then stopped. The silence returned, but this time, it was different. The young Spartan remained in position, his shield raised, his body still ready, but he felt it. The shift, the end of that moment, the command came. Hold. They did not move, because even in silence, the battle was not finished. Minutes passed, then more. The darkness remained. The enemy did not return. Not here, not now. The young Spartan exhaled slowly, his body still tense, still prepared, still ready for impact. But none came. Behind him, the commander spoke again. They are moving around. The words confirmed what he already knew. This had never been about breaking the line. It had been about avoiding it. The young Spartan tightened his grip once more, because that meant something else. This stand was working. The enemy had not passed, not here, not through them, and that was enough. The line remained, unbroken, unmoved, unchanged. Even after everything, even after the day and the night and the pressure that never stopped, the young Spartan stood firm, exhausted, strained, but steady, because now he understood fully. This was not about strength, not about victory, not about defeating the enemy. It was about being the obstacle, the barrier, the force that did not yield, no matter what came, no matter how long it lasted, no matter how much it demanded. Because in Sparta, that was what mattered, not the outcome, but the stand. And as long as the line held, so did everything behind it. The darkness did not lift quickly. It thinned, slowly, almost reluctantly. A faint gray light crept into the pass, outlining the edges of shields, the rough surface of stone, the shapes of men who had not moved through the night. The young Spartan felt it before he fully saw it. The subtle change in the air, the shift from unseen to barely visible. Morning, but it did not feel like a new beginning. It felt like a continuation, because nothing had ended. The line still stood, unbroken. The young Spartan adjusted his grip on the shield, his fingers stiff now, slower to respond, the weight heavier than it had ever been. His arms burned with a deep, steady pain, no longer sharp, no longer immediate, just constant. To his left, a Spartan exhaled deeply, his breath visible in the cold air, his posture still firm but strained. To his right, another remained perfectly still, his stance locked, his focus unbroken. No one spoke, because there was nothing to say. The enemy had not returned. Not directly, but they had not disappeared either. The young Spartan could see movement now, further back beyond the pass, figures shifting, lines forming, activity, but not engagement. They had changed strategy. Again. Behind the Spartan line, the commanders gathered briefly. Their voices were low, controlled, passing information quickly, efficiently. The young Spartan did not hear the words, but he saw the result, a shift, not in position, in understanding. The command came. Remain. It was simple. It always was. But it carried more weight now, because remaining meant something different today. It meant holding not just against attack, but against time. The young Spartan focused forward, his breathing slow, his mind clear despite the fatigue that pressed against every part of his body. The battle had stretched beyond a single moment, beyond a single clash. It had become something else, something deeper. Endurance. The enemy moved again, not toward the pass, around it, further along the cliffs, beyond direct sight, beyond immediate reach. The young Spartan watched the edges, the spaces where the terrain opened slightly, where movement could slip through if not controlled. But the Spartans did not chase. They did not abandon the line, because that would be the mistake. The command remained the same. Hold. Hours passed. The sun rose higher. The light strengthened. The heat returned. And with it, the weight of exhaustion. The young Spartan's body protested now, every muscle tight, every movement heavier than before. His shoulders burned beneath the shield, his legs strained to maintain balance, but he did not move, because moving was not allowed, because the line still mattered. The enemy tested them again, not with full force, not with numbers, but with precision. Small groups approached the pass, striking quickly, testing reaction, probing for weakness, then retreating before full engagement. The young Spartan responded as he had learned, controlled, measured, no chase, no break. Each attack met with stability, each attempt contained. The pattern repeated again and again. But something else was happening. The young Spartan could feel it. The enemy was no longer trying to break through. They were confirming something, confirming that the Spartans would not move, that they would remain, that they would hold this position no matter what. And once that was confirmed, the real movement began. The young Spartans saw it in the distance, not clearly, but enough. Large groups moving along the outer edges of the terrain, avoiding the pass entirely, shifting toward another path, another route. The realization settled fully now. This was never the only path. It was just the strongest one. And by holding it, the Spartans had forced the enemy to choose another, a longer path, a harder path, a slower path, but a path nonetheless. The young Spartan felt the weight of that truth, because it meant something important, They had not stopped the enemy. They had delayed them. And in that delay, something else had been protected. Something else had been given time. Behind them, somewhere beyond sight, something mattered enough to hold this position for. The young Spartan did not know what. He did not need to, because understanding the reason was not his role. Holding the line was. The attack slowed, and then stopped, completely. The enemy no longer tested the pass, no longer pushed, no longer engaged. They had moved on. The battle here was over. But the Spartans did not move. They remained, because the command had not changed, because certainty had not been given, because in Sparta, you did not decide when it ended. You waited. Time passed. Long, quiet, heavy. The young Spartan's arms trembled slightly now, the strain pushing against his control, testing it, trying to break through. But he held, because he had to, because that was everything. Finally, the command came. Stand down. The words carried through the line, simple, clear, final. The young Spartan lowered his shield. Slowly, the weight shifted. His arm dropped. The pressure released, but the imprint remained. The line broke, not in disorder, not in relief, but in controlled movement. Each man stepping back, adjusting, resetting. The formation dissolved, but the unity remained. The young Spartan took a step back, then another. His legs felt heavy now, his balance slightly uncertain after holding position for so long. But he remained upright, steady, because even now, control remained. He looked forward. The pass was empty, still, silent, as if nothing had happened. But he knew. He had been there. He had held. He had endured. And that was the purpose. The Spartans turned, not toward the enemy, but back toward where they had come from. The march began again. Slower this time. Heavier, but intact. The young Spartan walked with them, his body exhausted, his mind clear, because now he understood something fully. They had not fought for victory. They had not fought to destroy the enemy. They had fought to buy time, and time had been given. And in Sparta, that was enough, because sometimes holding the line was the victory. The march back did not feel like a return. It felt like something had been left behind. Not equipment, not formation. Something else. Something that could not be seen, but could be felt in every step. The young Spartan walked with the others, his body heavy, his muscles tight, each movement slower now that the pressure of the line had lifted. The shield hung at his side, no longer pressed into position, yet it still felt as if its weight remained on his arm, because some things did not leave immediately. The land stretched out before them once more. The same rough ground, the same silence, the same sky, but it did not feel the same, because he was not the same. Behind him, the pass disappeared slowly from view, swallowed by distance and terrain, as if it had never existed at all. But he knew. He had stood there. He had held. And that moment would not disappear. Hours passed. The formation remained, steady, unbroken, even now, because the battle might be over. But discipline was not. As they approached the city, the walls of Sparta appeared again. Simple, solid, unchanged. No banners, no decorations, no signs of victory or loss, because Sparta did not celebrate. It continued. The gates opened, the Spartans entered, just as they had before, without noise, without acknowledgement. The city did not react. It did not need to, because what had been done was expected. The young Spartan stepped inside, the familiar ground beneath his feet, the narrow paths, the stone structures, everything exactly as he had left it. But something inside him had shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but completely. He placed his shield down once more, the same place, the same motion. But it felt different now, because this time, he understood what it represented. Not protection, not strength, responsibility. The training resumed, almost immediately, because there was no time for reflection, no space for rest. The drills began again, the same movements, the same commands, the same structure. But now, they were not repetitions, they were reinforcement. Because everything that had been practiced had been used. And everything that had been used had to be perfected further. The instructor moved among them, watching, correcting, as always. You held. He stopped in front of the young Spartan. Yes. Why? The question was not simple. The young Spartan paused. Because the line held. The instructor nodded slightly. And why did the line hold? A longer pause. The young Spartan searched for the answer. Not in words, in understanding. Because we did not break. The instructor stepped closer. Not just you. He looked at the others. All of you. He stepped back. That is Sparta. The words settled. Because they were not praise. They were definition. Later, as the day moved on, the young Spartan found himself alone again. Not far from the training grounds, not far from the city, but far enough to feel the quiet. He stood still, looking out over the land once more, the same land he had crossed, the same land where he had stood, where he had held, where he had become something more than what he was before. A presence approached, the veteran. He stopped beside him. Neither spoke at first, because words were not needed. You understand now. The young Spartan did not look at him. Yes. A pause. What do you understand? The question was not a test. It was confirmation. The young Spartan took a slow breath. That it's not about fighting. Another pause. Or winning. The veteran remained silent. It's about holding. The words came clearly now. About not breaking, no matter what comes. The veteran nodded once. Good. He looked out across the land. But there's more. The young Spartan turned slightly. More? The veteran's gaze remained fixed forward. One day, the line will break. The words were calm. Not dramatic, not emotional, just truth. The young Spartan felt it, the weight of it, because he knew it was real. Not because you are weak, the veteran continued. Not because you failed. Another pause. But because everything eventually does. Silence followed, because there was no argument, no denial, only acceptance. The young Spartan looked forward again. The land stretched endlessly, still, quiet, unchanged. But beneath that stillness, everything moved, everything shifted, everything ended, eventually. What happens then? He asked quietly. The veteran did not answer immediately, because the answer was simple. You hold until you can't. The young Spartan lowered his gaze slightly, because that was it, that was everything. There was no final victory, no lasting success, no moment where it was finished, only continuation, until it ended. Days passed, training continued. The cycle remained, unbroken, but the young Spartan no longer saw it the same way. He no longer questioned, no longer searched for meaning beyond what was in front of him, because now he understood the system. He was part of it, completely. And in that system, there was only one truth. You were not fighting for glory. You were not fighting for recognition. You were not even fighting for survival. You were holding the line, for as long as you could, for as long as it was needed, for as long as it remained. And when it ended, you would not be remembered for winning, only for not breaking. The young Spartan stood, still, focused, unmoving, because now he was not preparing for battle. He was already part of it. And in Sparta, the battle never truly ended. It simply continued, through those who remained. There was no announcement, no signal that marked a new beginning. The shift came quietly, as it always did. The young Spartan noticed it in the smallest details first. The way the instructors watched him longer, the way corrections became fewer, but sharper, the way the others moved around him, not as they once had, but with a subtle adjustment, space, respect, expectation. He had crossed another line, not through ceremony, not through words, through endurance. Days turned into something harder to measure. Training did not become easier. It became more precise. The margin for error narrowed. Movements that once passed without notice were now corrected instantly. Because now, he was expected to know. The young Spartan stood in formation, the drills continuing as always. But his awareness had shifted. He no longer focused only on his own position. He watched the line, the spacing, the timing, the alignment of shields, the rhythm of movement. Because now, he understood something deeper. The line was not just something he was part of. It was something he had to protect. The instructor stepped forward. You. The young Spartan did not hesitate. He stepped out. Lead. The word landed heavily, because it changed everything. He moved to the front, turned, faced the others. For a brief moment, nothing moved. Not because they were waiting, because they were observing. The young Spartan felt it, the weight of their attention, the expectation. He raised his arm slightly, a simple signal. The line moved, forward, together. He adjusted the pace, measured, controlled. The formation followed. Because in Sparta, leadership was not given, it was followed. Only if it was correct. The drills continued, but now every mistake mattered more. Not just his, theirs. A gap formed, small but visible. The young Spartan stepped in, adjusted it, closed it, without breaking the flow. The instructor watched. Silent. The drills ended. The line held position. The instructor approached. You corrected it? Yes. Why? The young Spartan answered without hesitation. Because it would have broken the line. The instructor nodded. And what happens when the line breaks? A pause. The young Spartan knew. Everything fails. The instructor stepped back. That is why you lead. The words settled. Because they were not a reward. They were a responsibility. Later, the young Spartan walked through the city. The same paths, the same stone. But now, he saw them differently. Not as surroundings, as structure. Everything in Sparta had a purpose. Every movement, every rule, every expectation. Nothing existed without reason. Even silence had meaning. He passed a group of younger boys, training, struggling, falling behind, being corrected. He watched them for a moment, because he remembered. Not clearly, but enough. The uncertainty, the confusion, the effort. And now, he stood on the other side of it. The realization came quietly. He was no longer becoming a Spartan. He was one, fully, completely. The veteran appeared again, as he often did, not by chance, but by timing. "You see it now?" The young Spartan nodded. "I do." "What do you see?" The question remained the same, but the answer had changed. "The line is not just in battle." He paused. "It's everywhere." The veteran nodded once. "Good." He looked toward the training grounds. "You will teach them soon." The young Spartan frowned slightly. "Teach?" The veteran's expression did not change. "You think leadership is only in battle?" A pause. "It starts before it." The meaning settled, because it expanded everything. Leadership was not just holding the line, it was building it, maintaining it, ensuring it never weakened. Days passed. The young Spartan trained others, not with words, but with correction, with example, with presence. He adjusted stances, closed gaps, reinforced structure, because now his role had grown, not just to hold, but to ensure others could. Another summons came. War again. Not unexpected. Never unexpected. The formation gathered, as before, but this time, the young Spartan stood at the front, not beside, not within, ahead. The line formed behind him, the same structure, the same unity, but now it moved with him. The march began, the rhythm returned, but it felt different, because now every step carried more than his own weight. It carried theirs. The young Spartan did not look back. He did not need to. He could feel them, their movement, their alignment, their trust, because trust had replaced doubt. The battlefield came into view, open, wider than before, less controlled, more dangerous. The enemy stood in greater numbers, more spread out, less confined. This would not be the same. The young Spartan stepped forward, raised his arm. The line stopped, behind him, still, perfectly aligned. The command came, not from him, from above. But it did not matter, because now he translated it. He gave the signal. The line moved, forward, together. The battle began, but this time, he saw everything differently. Not just the enemy, the formation, the spacing, the pressure points, the potential breaks, because now he was responsible. The clash came, louder, wider, more chaotic, but the line held, because he held it. He adjusted pace, corrected movement, reinforced weak points, without hesitation, without doubt, because there was no space for it. The young Spartan struck, moved, adjusted, not as a fighter alone, but as the center of something larger. The battle stretched, the pressure increased, but the line remained, because now it was not just discipline, it was leadership, and leadership held the line. The young Spartan stood firm, even as the fight intensified, even as the strain grew, because now he understood the final truth. You do not lead to win. You do not lead to survive. You lead so the line never breaks. And as long as it held, so did everything behind it. The battlefield did not end with a single moment. It unfolded, slowly, relentlessly. The young Spartan stood at the front of the line, not as a figure of power, but as a point of balance. Every movement behind him depended on what he did next. Every step, every adjustment, every decision carried weight, because now the line followed him. The clash had already begun, the first impact shaking through the formation. But he did not react to the noise. He did not focus on the chaos ahead. He focused on structure, the alignment of shields, the spacing between men, the rhythm of movement, because if that remained, everything else could be controlled. forward. The command moved through him, then through them. The line stepped, together. The ground trembled slightly beneath the weight of synchronized movement. The enemy pressed from all sides, more scattered than before, more unpredictable, less bound by formation. But that was their weakness. The young Spartan adjusted the angle of advance, narrowing the front, forcing the engagement into a tighter space, reducing the advantage of numbers. The line responded, instantly, because they trusted the movement, because they understood the purpose. The enemy struck harder, their attacks less controlled, more desperate. They tried to overwhelm the edges, to stretch the formation, to force separation. But the young Spartan anticipated it. He shifted left, then right, closing space before it could open, reinforcing pressure where it began to weaken, because now he saw the breaks before they formed. The fight intensified, the noise rose, the pressure increased, but the line remained. The young Spartan's body strained under the effort, his arms burning, his breath heavier, his legs fighting to maintain balance. But none of it reached his mind, because his mind was focused, clear. Everything outside the line faded. The enemy pushed again, harder, stronger, a surge. For a moment, the line bent, not broken, but close. The young Spartan felt it, the shift, the danger. This was the moment, the one that decided everything. He did not hesitate. He stepped forward, not back, forward, driving his shield into the pressure, forcing the movement outward, breaking the force before it could settle. The men behind him followed. The line straightened, then pushed, together. The surge reversed. The enemy lost balance, just enough. That was all it took. The young Spartan advanced again, measured, controlled. The line followed. The pressure shifted. The enemy began to give ground, not in order, not with control, but in fragments, and fragmentation meant weakness. The Spartans did not chase wildly. They advanced with purpose, maintaining formation, maintaining structure, because breaking the line, even in victory, was still failure. The battle stretched, minutes, then more, but the outcome was forming. The enemy retreated, faster now, less controlled. The field opened, the pressure eased, and finally, it ended. Not with a final strike, not with a single moment, but with absence. The absence of resistance, the absence of pressure, the absence of threat. The young Spartan stood still. The line held, even now, because the command had not yet been given. Silence fell slowly, heavy, real. The battlefield remained, changed, marked, but quiet. The command came. Stand. The line did not move. Then, break. The formation dissolved, controlled, measured. Each man stepping back, lowering shield and spear. The young Spartan lowered his arm. Slowly. The weight left his body. But something remained, the realization. This was not the end. It never was. He turned. The men behind him followed, not because they were told, because they understood. The march back began, the same as before, but different, because now he carried more, not just his own experience, but theirs, their trust, their survival, their place in the line. As they walked, the battlefield faded behind them, becoming just another part of the land, another place where something had happened and ended. But for the young Spartan, it did not end. It settled. It became part of him. As they approached Sparta, the city remained unchanged. No celebration, no recognition, only continuation. Because in Sparta, there was no final victory, only the next moment, the next training, the next battle, the next test. The young Spartan stepped inside the gates, the same stone, the same path, the same silence. But now, he was different, not because he had won, not because he had led, because he had understood. The line was not something you joined, it was something you became. The veteran stood waiting, as always. You held. The young Spartan nodded. We did. The veteran looked at him. For now. The same words, but now they meant something deeper. The young Spartan did not question them because he knew. Everything ended, eventually. Every line broke, every system failed, every man reached his limit. But that did not change the purpose. It did not change the rule. You held until you couldn't. And when that moment came, it would not be marked. It would not be remembered. It would not be announced. It would simply happen. And the line would continue through someone else. The young Spartan looked forward, not toward the next battle, not toward the future, but toward the moment in front of him, because that was all that existed. That was all that mattered. Sparta was not built on victory. It was built on endurance, on discipline, on the refusal to break. And those who lived within it did not seek to be remembered. They sought only to remain, for as long as they could, for as long as the line held. And when it ended, they would not be gone. They would be part of what remained. Because in Sparta, no man stood alone, and no line ever truly disappeared. It simply passed on to those who were ready to hold it next.